Our story starts in Harborford, Washington 1871. A church is nearby and we see three men holding another man in chains. They drive a steel stake into the ground which is connected to the man's chains. A priest is saying some words over the man. Suddenly, lightning strikes the steel stake and the man is electrocuted, as long tentacles appear from the man's back. What is happening to the man? This is Action Recaps. Follow today to a 2008 horror demon movie titled Scourge. Be aware, there are spoilers. Fast forward to Harborford 2021 and we see the old church again. The fire brigade is packing up after extinguishing what looks like a fire at the front of the church. Now we see a man called Scott riding his motorbike. He stops briefly at the church to have a look, then continues riding through town to stop again to watch some people outside a house. A police car pulls up and the officer known as Sheriff Durst asks Scott why he is in this part of town. He tells Scott to go home, then he drives off. A girl named Jessie appears and starts talking to Scott. Jessie has been away for 2 years. She asks him for a hot drink. It seems they were once a couple. Back at the church, one of the firemen named Josh goes in to have a look around. When he pokes a hole in the floor with his axe, something pulls him down to the floor. He struggles, then eventually gets up, not sure of what just happened. At the fire station we see Josh in the kitchen at the fridge. He eats a whole block of cheese, then pours milk down his throat. 3 other firemen are watching him and one gives him a beer, but it makes him sick, so he runs to the bathroom. He can't stop belching. He gets in the shower and starts scratching his head. When he looks in the mirror he sees a large piece of skin lifting off his forehead. He sees another man in the bathroom and runs at him, but the man pushes him away, so he goes to his locker, gets dressed and walks out to his truck, still belching. At the skating rink Scott is playing ice hockey and sees Jessie come in. Now Josh has walked in, very unstable, and sees his girlfriend named Lydia on the other side of the rink. He opens the gate and walks out onto the ice in the middle of the game. Lydia meets him on the other side and takes him into a dressing room. As she leans against the lockers, Josh kneels down, dropping his fireman's badge. He opens his mouth and a strange-looking parasite with tentacles crawls out of his mouth and enters Lydia's navel. She pushes him away and walks out, but Josh now looks like he's bleeding from the eyes and mouth. Scott walks into the dressing room and finds Lydia on her way out. He walks into the locker room and finds Josh's fireman's badge, but Josh has already left. Josh stumbles down the back stairs and collapses. Now we see Scott and Lydia walking together, out of the ice rink after the game. Scott introduces Lydia to Jessie and Lydia seems a little jealous. She reminds him of their date tonight and leaves. Later, we see Lydia at home in her bathroom. Her stomach sounds really upset and there seems to be some sort of growth on her spine. Scott arrives later to pick her up, but she doesn't answer the door. We see Lydia's kitchen and there's food mess everywhere. He calls her phone and leaves a message that he doesn't want to see her anymore. He thinks she might be with Josh. We see Lydia in her bathroom again, dressed ready to go out, but then she notices a piece of skin coming off her breast, but she covers it up. Meanwhile, Scott is outside on his motorbike when Lydia walks out of the apartments. She grabs a man as he walks past, but he pushes her away. She doesn't see Scott, but he sees her and decides to follow her. Lydia walks into a nightclub full of people dancing. As she stands there belching, she eyes off a big guy known as Studdy and walks towards him. Scott watches as Lydia starts to kneel down, but Studdy quickly walks her away and Scott follows them to the ladies' toilets. He peeks through the door to see Lydia kissing Studdy's stomach, so he closes the door. Inside, we see Studdy reacting as Lydia passes the parasite to Studdy's navel. As Scott opens the door again, Studdy pushes past him to leave. Scott starts talking to Lydia, who is facing the back wall, but she doesn't respond. He turns her around and her face is covered with blood. As 2 other women enter the toilets, Lydia leans over and vomits blood, then collapses. Scott rushes out of the toilets while the 2 women are screaming hysterically. Scott rides off on his motorbike. Now we see Sheriff Durst and his deputy named Sam leaving the shop at a petrol station. Durst gets a radio call about an incident at the nightclub, so they speed off into town. We see Scott riding his bike out of town when he stops on a bridge and thinks of Jessie, so he turns around and rides to her house. He goes round the back and climbs up to her window and knocks on the glass. Jessie wakes up and lets him in. She sees the blood on his face, hands and clothes and asks him if he was fighting. She's upset with him and tells him he'll have to leave in the morning, but he doesn't tell her what happened. At the nightclub, deputy Sam interviews the girls who saw Scott run out of the toilets. Durst calls his niece Jessie and asks if she's seen Scott, but she tells him, no. Scott is asleep on Jess's sofa and having a bad nightmare. He sees her looking into the bathroom mirror with blood running out of her eyes. He wakes up and runs upstairs to find that she's okay. The next morning Scott wakes up as the local news is reporting the death of Lydia. Jessie calls the police station to talk to her uncle, Sheriff Durst, while Scott is trying to tell her that he didn't do anything to Lydia. She shows Scott the fireman's badge and says she saw Josh at the ice rink yesterday. Scott thinks Lydia must have been poisoned by Josh. Durst arrives at the front door with his gun drawn, and as he enters, Scott hides behind the front door. While Durst is talking to Jessie, Scott slips away. Now we see Studdy walking amongst the traffic, eating food off the ground. In a shopping center we see Studdy pushing people out of the way as he looks at girls' navels. Studdy tries to grab some girls, but when one guy hits him, his lower jaw almost falls off. Deputy Sam arrives and tells Studdy to stay back, but he won't, so Sam and Durst shoot Studdy and he falls to the ground. At the fire station, Scott sets off the alarm, and when the fire trucks leave he sneaks in to find some evidence of what happened to Josh. He sees that the last job Josh attended was the old church fire. A fireman is watching a news report about Studdy, and Scott, who is hiding under the desk, recognizes Studdy as the guy that Lydia was with before she died. At the hospital, two attendants open the back of the ambulance that has Studdy's body in it, but another attendant steps out with blood on his clothes. Looks like he now has the parasite. Meanwhile, Jessie is talking to her mum, who's worried about her, but Jessie tells her she's okay. Jessie watches the latest news report and realizes that Scott was telling her the truth. Jessie calls Scott and tells him. Attendant steps out with blood on his clothes. Looks like he now has the parasite. Meanwhile, Jessie is talking to her mum, who's worried about her, but Jessie tells her she's okay. Jessie watches the latest news report and realizes that Scott was telling her the truth. Jessie calls Scott and tells him she wants to help him. Jessie pulls up in her car and she and Scott drive to the old church to look for clues. They find Josh's axe, then look downstairs for something. Jessie finds a paper tied with string. They read about the parasite called Coraja that was locked in a bottle back in 1871. Scott realizes that the Coraja must have moved on to someone else. At the hospital, Jessie finds out that the last person to see Studdy's body was an attendant named Eddie. As they drive off, it looks like they're being followed. At the local skate park we see Eddie trying to take some potato chips from a girl, but she tells him to do a skateboard stunt first. It looks like Eddie has found a girl's navel that he wants. Jessie goes to the library and finds some interesting information about the church back in 1871. She finds the name of the man, Edward Norberg, who was struck by lightning in 1871, and finds his descendant's name in the local phone book. Meanwhile, Scott is at the skate park looking for Eddie, but when he sees a group standing around a body, he realizes that the girl Eddie attacked has probably got the Coraja from him. When he tries to take her for help, one of the guys knocks Scott out with a skateboard. Now we see Jessie outside the house of Edward Norberg's descendant. As she walks up to the front door, the same car that was following her pulls up. Inside the house, an old woman tells Jessie some of the history of her great-grandfather and La Coraja, the scourge. She gives Jessie a key to the shed that still has his things inside. At the skate park, Durst and Sam find Scott next to Eddie's body. Durst arrests Scott and puts him in a cell. In the shed, Jessie finds a very old book about the Coraja, but a man is watching her through the window. The old woman tells Jessie that they've arrested a boy for the murders and Jessie will have to go and straighten things out. At the jail, a biker is also put in the cell with Scott. He then tells Scott about a girl who went for a ride with him, and when they stopped, she kneeled down and started going crazy and spewing blood everywhere. Scott can hear this guy's stomach gurgling away and realizes that the biker probably has the parasite in him now. Scott calls out for Durst to let him out. The biker goes for Scott, but he kicks him away and knocks him out. As Durst opens the cell door, Scott gets out just in time and the biker gets up and loses 2 fingers in the door. As Scott watches, the biker grabs Durst, then kneels down and the parasite comes out of the biker's mouth. Durst calls Scott for help and Scott grabs the gun from Durst to shoot the parasite, but it's too late, it's already entered Durst's body. Durst takes the gun from Scott as the biker asks for help, with blood all over his face. Scott runs out of the jail and Durst and the other police go after him. Jessie has just pulled up outside and she sees Scott run off and the police after him. As Durst and Sam are driving, Durst reaches over for some donuts and we see Jessie hiding on the floor in the back. Durst and Sam chase Scott down an alley, and when Scott stops, They get out of the car and Durst wants to shoot Scott. Jessie gets out and points a taser at Durst. She wants to help Scott, but Durst tells her to back off. Before Sam can shoot Scott, Jessie fires the taser at Durst and he staggers backwards with tentacles coming out of his back. Sam can't believe his eyes, but when Durst walks towards him, he shoots Durst till he drops. Shortly after, Durst sits up and shoots Sam through the head. Scott and Jessie get into the police car, but Durst comes after them. Jessie runs him down, but he gets up again, so she reverses and rams him against the wall and petrol starts leaking out of the car. Durst manages to crawl to the front of the car and Scott throws a flare into the petrol in the car and Durst bursts into flames. They run off and find a diner where Jessie shows Scott the books about the Corrija. As the waitress comes with coffee, Jessie kisses Scott so the waitress won't see his face. Back at the alley, the fire department is there and lots of onlookers. We see another deputy walking around, keeping people back. A large man with a camera tries to take photos, but the deputy sends him away. In the diner, Scott and Jessie realize that the parasite is still alive because it can't be killed by fire. They quickly leave and head back to the alley. In the alley, we see the large man wearing a fireman's helmet so he can get close to take some photos of Durst's body. As Scott and Jessie arrive, they see Durst come back to life and reach up to pass the Corrija to the large photographer. The police come in and take the photographer away from the scene. 3 men arrive and ask Sam to show them the body. The large photographer leaves in a taxi. Scott and Jessie follow the taxi to a bar where the photographer enters. They decide that they'll have to take care of it themselves before it multiplies. They rent a room at the hotel next door and Scott goes back to the Norberg's house for some equipment. Jessie walks into the bar where the photographer is scoffing down peanuts. She sits next to him and orders a beer and bourbon shots, one after another. Back in the hotel room, Scott prepares the wiring to electrocute the photographer to remove the scourge. In the bar, Jessie pretends to approach the photographer and tells him that her boyfriend has been cheating on her, so she wants to get even. They go to the hotel room together while Scott hides in the bathroom. Jessie convinces him to sit in a chair while she ties him up, then Scott emerges from the bathroom and tapes the wires to the photographer's chest. The guy is freaking out, but Scott tells him this is the only way to get a dangerous parasite out of his body. Jessie hits the power and the guy is convulsing. They lose power and Jessie goes to reset the fuse. When she returns, the scourge has entered Scott's body. Scott attacks her, but the scourge won't enter her body because she's been drinking so much. He tells her to stop him, so she reaches for the bed lamp and breaks the end off and electrocutes Scott. He holds the lamp against his body while Jessie grabs the tongs. When the scourge exits Scott's mouth, Jessie grabs it with the tongs and wrestles with it. The photographer regains consciousness and Jessie tells him to get help. She manages to push the scourge into a large container of wine and it is subdued. Outside, police cars arrive with the priest as Jessie is helping Scott outside. Scott and Jessie watch as the priest burns the scourge at 1,500 degrees, the only way to destroy it. He tells them that most of them were destroyed many years ago, then he leaves them. In a hospital storeroom, we see an attendant at work when she hears a noise in the adjoining room. She goes to investigate and finds the fat photographer eating the remains of a body. Looks like he still has a scourge inside him. Like and subscribe to watch more videos like this, and don't forget to turn on your notifications. That really helps my channel. Thanks for watching.